Hello everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. In this video I want to focus on the main causes of motorcycle rider mistakes. I've been thinking a lot about this topic recently. I'm not sure why, but I think I have a few things worth noting. I think there are two main causes of rider mistakes. The first is a lack of skill or lack of ability to properly execute the technical aspects of motorcycle riding. The second, and by far the biggest category, is lack of good judgment. So let's get down to the details. Problems with lack of skill usually manifest themselves when there is little time to consciously think about your actions. Things like grabbing a handful of front brake at low speeds with your handlebars turned. This will usually cause you to dump the bike. Another one is letting the clutch out too quickly while revving too much. This will cause you to accelerate out of control and likely result in accidental wheeling, at the least. A guy in my son's MSF course did this. He was on his Harley-Davidson 500 Street that they furnished with the class and got completely vertical with the bike and ended up flunking the class. Other areas under this classification include lack of skill or in terms of proper counter steering techniques at turns, downshifting at too high of engine RPM, upshifting at too low of engine RPM, applying too much rear brake in panic stops, and the like. In other words, inadequately developed techniques for handling, steering, braking, acceleration, and shifting. The good news is that these skills can be developed through proper training and regular practice. The idea is to develop these skills into muscle memory so that you can execute them without thinking. It's like learning to play the guitar. You have to develop the proper muscle memory for playing, because if you had to think about each note as you played it, it just wouldn't work. The other area, and by far the biggest source of rider mistakes, is due to lack of good judgment or due to mistakes in judgment. Let me explain this. If you take a new rider and put them on a 200 horsepower sports bike, they're likely to overload their skill level very quickly. So the start of good judgment in riding a motorcycle is with the selection of an appropriate bike to begin with. This would be a bike that fits the rider well. It's not too big or too heavy. A bike that has the right amount of power, not too much or too little. On the too little side, you wouldn't want to take a 125cc Grom or Z125 Pro on the highway. You just couldn't keep up. It wouldn't be safe. You'd have a hard time getting out of people's blind spots. You'd have people on your tail. It's not a good scenario. A few things on the fitment front can include whether you can comfortably reach the controls. Can you reach the brake and the clutch without your arms being stretched out fully straight? Can you put your feet flat on the ground at a stop, or at least close to it? A while back I saw this video of a petite Thai woman. She is riding a Ducati Multistrada. That bike has a 34-inch seat height, and she could only touch the ground with the tips of her toes 1 foot at a time. And to get started on the bike, she would kind of push it and then jump onto the saddle. Although she was a skilled rider, she didn't leave herself much room for error on that particular bike. So let's look at some other areas of lack of judgment. Let's say you're riding through a curve at 45 miles an hour that's posted at 25 miles an hour because, let's face it, it's fun, but you end up low-siding the bike after hitting a patch of gravel. This is clearly an error in judgment. This is because you can't have the expectation that the roadway will be free of debris, potholes, or other issues at all times. I know this firsthand because I did something like this in Austin, Texas in the early 90s. I was going down a big hill about 45 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone on my 750 Honda Nighthawk, bike that handled very well, but as I came to a stop behind some cars that were stopped at a red light at the base of the hill, I couldn't stop. The entire roadway was covered with 1-inch pieces of gravel that must have fell off a nearby truck or passing truck. It was like trying to stop on a bunch of ball bearings. I decided to lay the bike down to avoid going into the intersection and get hit by oncoming or cross traffic. So luckily I was fine except for bruises on my hip. Another error in judgment is riding impaired. This can be from fatigue, drugs, even prescription drugs, or alcohol. I personally have a 24-hour rule where I don't ride within 24 hours of having consumed any alcohol. Of course, I don't use drugs and anything like that. So, but as far as the alcohol thing, I learned that the hard way. When I was in my mid-20s, I rode my motorcycle at home at night after having 5 or 6 beers at a local dive bar where I was living in Omaha. I discovered that I had very poor balance. I was weaving all over the place. I couldn't see well, and it was just a nightmare. I told myself that if I made it home in one piece, that I would never drink and ride again. But you know, that was another error in judgment. It didn't even occur to me to park the bike and take a cab home. How about riding aggressively, passing everyone on the road, weaving in and out of traffic, riding angry or expecting everyone else on the road to do exactly what you want them to do? These are all examples of poor judgment and are the types of actions that occur if you listen to the little devil on your shoulder. I think men of all ages are at risk for listening to this little devil, but men under the age of 25 years of age are at greater risk. This is because the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the part that controls judgment, is not fully wired until that age of 25. This generally happens a little sooner for women, which is, I think, a big part of the reason why insurance rates are so much higher for younger men compared to younger women. On the question of good riding judgment, there are some gray areas, I think. I typically will avoid riding on the first 60 or 70 degree day after a long spell of winter weather. The road will often still have patches of salt or sand left over from when they applied this stuff to provide better traction or to melt the ice during snow and freezing rain events. The other thing is drivers are less accustomed to seeing motorcycle riders through the winter. So if I choose to ride anyway under these circumstances and tell myself to be extra careful, am I making an error in judgment? I've learned that if I tell myself to be extra careful, that I probably should not be engaging in that activity under the circumstances that exist at that time. One time I was on a job site and I had to work around an open hole in the ground that was 3 feet in diameter and 70 foot deep. If I fell into that hole, I'd risk serious injury or even death. I told myself to be extra careful to not step into the hole. After about 10 minutes, another worker walked up and put a big sheet of wood over the hole. I realized I should have had something like that done from the very beginning instead of just being extra careful, especially since the potential consequences were so great. So when you think about it, there are 2 main types of error in judgment. Doing something that you shouldn't do, which include my previously discussed examples here, and not doing something that you should. This reminds me of the poem by Ogden Nash titled Portrait of the Artist as a Prematurely Old Man. Nash was a very humorous poet, and this is one of my favorite poems of his. He basically says in this poem that there are 2 types of sin: doing things that you shouldn't and not doing the things that you should. He concluded that either one could get you into equal amount of trouble, but that sins of commission were much more fun than sins of omission. So let's talk about not doing things that you should, like not doing a pre-ride inspection of your motorcycle, you know, the T-clock thing, where you check your tires, your controls, your lights, your oil, your chassis, kickstand or side stand. The whole idea is you should not be on a bike that has not been properly maintained or is not ready to ride due to a mechanical issue. For example, most bikes will have a sensor that will kill the engine if the bike is running in gear with the side stand down, because you definitely don't want to be making a left turn with your side stand down. Older bikes typically don't have these sensors. In the past, I've actually alerted other motorcycle riders in traffic who are riding around with their side stand down, and believe me, they were happy to get the heads up. Another example of not doing something you should is not wearing proper safety gear. If you want to use good judgment, a person would follow all the gear all the time motto. After all, you can't really know ahead of time when you're going to need the gear to work for you. So the bottom line is, how do you develop the proper judgment for riding a motorcycle? Hopefully you will have the guidance of an experienced mentor, a parent, guardian, grandparent, or friend, and learn to make proper judgment calls from the very beginning of your rider experience. Or if you're like most people, you'll have to learn the hard way by learning from your own experience. It's like the old saying goes, a smart person learns from their own mistakes, but a wise person learns from others' mistakes. So be careful out there, everyone. Thanks, and please be on the lookout for new videos soon.